They say ceremonies bring people together. I say they unmask them. It was a wedding in a rented vineyard just outside Sacramento. Not a grand estate, just enough curated charm to convince everyone they were somewhere special. Strings of lights hung like artificial stars. Lavender in jars. Folding chairs covered in white silk that would be ruined by dust before nightfall. The quartet played soft covers of familiar songs, and everyone smiled like they'd practiced in front of mirrors. I wasn't part of it. Not really. I stood on the outskirts like an unpaid usher, nodding, refilling wine, wiping down seats that weren't mine to sit in. The man who paid for the venue hadn't arrived yet, but I already felt like the only one who didn't belong. Claire had insisted we come. Her niece Emma was getting married. "Family shows up," she'd said, adjusting her pearl earrings without looking at me. But it wasn't a request. It never was. I hadn't been to many weddings in the last decade. Too many weekends lost to overtime. Too many holidays sacrificed for the kind of stability no one applauds you for keeping. Claire called it quiet dedication. Evan, her son, called it trying too hard. He was already there when we arrived. Evan, 23 years old and nothing like the boy I met when he was 7. Taller now, sharper, the kind of man who laughed with his eyes before his mouth even moved. He wore a tailored blue suit that I'm sure I helped pay for. He didn't look at me when we entered. He looked through me. He hadn't said a word during the ceremony. Just stood 2 rows ahead of me, whispering jokes into his girlfriend's ear while the bride said her vows. He laughed once, loud enough to turn heads. Claire didn't react. She never did when it was him. After the ceremony, we all moved to the reception area. A tent draped in chiffon, with gold-trimmed tables and name cards written in calligraphy. Mine was easy to find. Folded, simple, tucked into the corner of a table where no one else sat. Not even Claire. She had been ushered to the head table next to the groom's family. She didn't ask me to join her. She didn't look back. Her smile was steady, wide, the kind she saved for people who still thought she was warm. The music played. Toasts began. And somewhere between the second course and the 4th glass of champagne, Evan decided I had existed long enough. He approached me with the slow, confident walk of someone who had never known consequence. A full glass of red wine in one hand, that grin in the other. People saw him coming. Some of them leaned back. Some didn't bother pretending not to watch. There's always that moment before a car crash. A second where everyone sees the impact coming and still can't look away. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, raised his glass, and dumped it over my head. It wasn't an accident. Not even a performance. It was an exorcism. The wine hit cold at first, then warm. It slid down the back of my neck, into the collar of my shirt. My tie darkened like blood soaking into gauze. I heard someone gasp. Then silence. Even the quartet stopped. Then Evan leaned in, his voice clear, loud, cutting through the silence like a knife drawn across bone. "Why did they even let you in here? You're nobody." He said it slowly, with emphasis, the kind of sentence designed to stick. And it did. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. My hands were still holding the silverware I hadn't touched. Then I turned, looked at Claire. She hadn't moved. Still seated, still smiling faintly, as if Evan hadn't just humiliated me in front of 70 people. Her gaze met mine, and then she nodded. Not apologetically, not reluctantly. She nodded like someone confirming a truth they had always known but never spoken aloud. And then, just as clearly, she said, "It's your own fault. You've always been unnecessary." Unnecessary. The word landed heavier than the wine. It's strange how a single syllable can carry more weight than years of silence. I had lived with Claire and Evan for almost 17 years. Paid bills, fixed toilets, worked weekends, showed up to parent-teacher conferences when Evan's real father forgot the date. And in all that time, I told myself that maybe, just maybe, I was slowly becoming essential. Now I knew. I stood there for a moment, my skin sticky with wine, the taste of iron creeping into the corners of my mouth. The smell hit next, sweet, sour, cloying. I reached for the cloth napkin beside my plate and wiped my face. One stroke. Two. Folded it again. Dried the back of my neck. Then I straightened my tie, still soaked through, and picked up the microphone. The toast had been written days ago. Polished, safe, full of polite nothings. But I didn't speak from the page. I didn't speak at all. I raised the mic, looked at the couple. Two kids who didn't know the weight of a real promise yet, and smiled. Then I set the microphone down without saying a word, and walked away. No shouting, no confrontation, no demands for apologies that would never come. Just footsteps over gravel, the whisper of silence behind me, and the soft creak of the rental car door as I climbed inside. I didn't drive, not at first. I sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes on the rearview mirror. I watched the venue shrink in the glass. The lights blurred into nothing. The music picked up again, quieter, unsure of itself. People returned to their meals. Someone laughed, high and forced. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was awake, and sometimes that's worse. You spend years half asleep, telling yourself that love is complicated, that disrespect is a language you'll one day learn to translate, that patience will earn you the place you were never given. And then one day someone pours wine on your head, calls you nobody, and your wife, the woman whose bills you've paid, whose son you helped raise, agrees with him. That's the day you stop hoping. That's the day you stop pretending. I watched the clock on the dashboard tick forward. 1 minute. 2. 10. At 30 minutes past the moment Evan baptized me in public humiliation, I made my first real decision in years. And that was the end of the family they thought would never leave them. 30 minutes. That's how long I sat in the car. Not in a rage. Not crushed. I wasn't even shaking. That would have meant I still had something left to protect. No, I was still. Frozen in the kind of clarity that only betrayal delivers. There was no music in the car. No air conditioning. Just the faint echo of celebration in the distance. Clinking glasses, the tentative return of laughter. The quartet picking up where it left off like nothing had happened. I wasn't angry. I was deciding. And there's a difference. Anger wants to shout, wants witnesses. Decision, it's quiet. It doesn't ask for understanding. It doesn't beg for an audience. It just is. You open a door that can't be shut again. At 31 minutes past humiliation, I took out my phone. The bank app loaded slow, like even it hesitated to let me do what I was about to do. But once I was in, the routine came back like muscle memory. I scrolled through the automatic transfers I had set up over the years, silent threads I had spun around a family that never asked how the web was held together. First, Evan's tuition card. A direct monthly transfer. For digits, every first of the month. Cancelled. Second, the gas card tied to the car he drove. My name on the registration. My credit covering the bills. Deactivated. Third, the shared Netflix, Spotify, Amazon. I revoked every login tied to my email. They'd get the error screens by morning. Something went wrong, the apps would say. Fourth, the rent. Not for my house. For the house they lived in, Claire and Evan. A 2-bedroom in Folsom, near the light rail. Claire insisted on it after he failed his second lease. He needs stability, she said. It's just temporary. 2 years of temporary. Lease signed in my name. Rent withdrawn from my account. Cancelled. And I made sure the landlord got the notice directly. Then the real cut, the car. Claire's SUV. Bought it 3 years ago. She wanted something safe. Something not embarrassing. It was registered to me. Financed through my credit. Insured on my policy. She told her friends she had finally upgraded. She never mentioned how. I opened the remote lock system. Tapped into the control panel. Disabled ignition. By morning, it would be a 5,000-pound sculpture sitting useless in the driveway. One more thing. I had never touched the emergency fund. 17 years of quiet saving. Just over $92,000 in a side account. Claire didn't know it existed. She thought our finances were joined, but I kept that piece untouched, sacred. That account, I moved it, transferred the full amount to a new institution. New bank. New security questions. One that bore no connection to our shared past. When I finished, I stared at the screen like a man reading his own eulogy. Every action was quiet. No messages. No threats. No warnings. Just absence. The slow, invisible collapse of a life they thought was permanent. People say revenge is loud. They're wrong. The deepest cuts are surgical. Clean. Done in silence. I didn't return home that night. There was no point. The house wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been for years. My clothes were there. My tools. My photographs. But my presence had been revoked long before Evan ever touched that wineglass. Instead, I drove. Nowhere in particular. Just kept the road under me like a lifeline. Somewhere along I-80, I pulled into a rest stop. Bought coffee I didn't drink. Watched a moth throw itself against a fluorescent light until it died. That was love, I thought. Throwing yourself against something that will never let you in, hoping it kills you before you realize it's pointless. At sunrise, I booked a room 2 towns over. Cash payment. No ID. Just for the week. I needed the space to think. To build the second version of myself. The one that didn't answer to Claire's texts or Evan's emergencies. And I thought they'd call immediately. They didn't. No messages. No voicemails. Not even a missed call. Not that day. Not the next. It was the third morning when the silence cracked. Claire called twice. I didn't answer. No voicemail left. Just the sharp ring of someone who only dials when they've lost control. That same morning I made the final call. Not to Claire. Not to Evan. To Mark Dalton, Evan's biological father. I had his number. He used to call when he felt like playing parent for a weekend or needed to polish his conscience before dating someone new. He never paid on time. Never asked how Evan was doing in school. But he showed up on Christmas every few years with a smirk and a check too small to cash. I called him at 8:10 a.m. sharp. Before he could say a word, I spoke. I'm stepping away. He said nothing. I've removed myself from every financial obligation tied to your son. Rent, tuition, credit, insurance. He's yours now. Still silence. I continued, calm. I have the paperwork to transfer the lease. I can send you the landlord's contact. Car's disabled, it'll need new registration. Everything else he'll come to you for. Then I paused. Gave him space to react. And he didn't. Nothing. Not confusion. Not gratitude. Not even panic. Just silence. And that silence told me everything. He hadn't planned to ever be responsible. He had trusted, like Claire and Evan, that I would carry it all indefinitely. That I would swallow insult after insult and still show up with the checkbook. But now the weight was in his lap. He muttered something about needing time. I hung up. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, it all caught up with them. Claire and Evan stood at my old front door. Not smug. Not superior. They looked like people who had walked into a burning building and only just realized they couldn't find the exits. Claire's makeup was uneven. Her hair undone. Evan's shirt was wrinkled. Eyes red. Mouth pressed tight. He had aged in 3 days. I opened the door slowly. They didn't speak. Claire was the first to try. Her voice soft. Trained. There's something wrong with the bank. The cards aren't working. Mine or Evan's. I thought maybe. I didn't flinch. They've been canceled. Evan stepped forward. The car won't start. I know. Claire blinked. And the rent. Due next week. Your landlord's expecting someone else to sign the lease. The silence between us was no longer tense. It was dead. They had walked into this house expecting negotiation. There would be none. Claire tried again. You didn't even warn us. I nodded. That was the point. Her mouth opened, closed. Evan, always quicker to anger, clenched his fists. You think this is fair? You're punishing us because of one stupid moment? I looked him in the eyes. No, I'm punishing myself if I stay. He looked stunned, as if the idea of me choosing myself was somehow unnatural. Claire's voice broke. We didn't mean it. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't mean what? Pouring wine on me? Calling me nobody? Or nodding in agreement when it happened? She turned away. Evan's voice was smaller now. You're really not coming back, are you? I shook my head. I'm not angry. I'm just Done. They stood there for a while, like people waiting for a verdict that had already been delivered. There were no bags, no gifts, no apologies, just the disbelief of people who had lived too long in the safety of being forgiven. Claire whispered, "We didn't think you'd actually leave." And there it was, the real confession. They thought I was permanent, an unpaid debt that never came due. But everything ends. Even me. I closed the door slowly. No force, no drama, just gravity doing what it always does. And for the first time in years, I felt light. The morning after the door closed behind them, I woke to silence. Not peace, just absence. It was strange how fast the world rearranged itself without them. The sun still rose. The faucet still dripped. The coffee machine still hissed in its quiet ritual. The world didn't mourn when I left. It exhaled. I drank my coffee slowly. No rush. No interruptions. No voice behind me asking if I'd remembered to send Evan's textbook allowance, or fix the leak in his bathroom, or pick up Claire's dry cleaning because she was too swamped again. Just the ticking of a clock that finally felt like it belonged to me. By 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. Claire. For calls. Then 5. Then silence again. No voicemails. No texts. Just the stubborn rhythm of someone who couldn't believe they no longer had access. Then came the message. One line. "You've made your point. Can we talk?" "No, Claire. We already did, just not in words. You spoke through your silence. Through your nod. Through every time you watched Evan twist the knife and never once reached for my hand. Your language was in your choices. Mine was in my exit. But they still didn't understand. They thought this was a tantrum, a performance, a man sulking until someone apologized just right. So I made the call. Not to Claire. Not to Evan. I had spoken to them in the only language they respected, absence. I called Mark again. Evan's father. The biological one. The man who had scattered his DNA and vanished when it no longer suited him to play dad. The phone rang 5 times before he picked up. "Hello, Michael." Silence. I heard traffic. A car door. Muffled voices in the background. "I'm following up," I said. "I hope you've arranged for Evan's next rent payment. And the tuition he's behind on." The university emailed again this morning. Another warning. He didn't answer. I kept my tone level. Unemotional. Like reading a weather report. "You might also want to look into car insurance. He'll need new plates. Title II. Everything's off my name now." Still nothing. "Mark." A breath. Then, "You serious about this?" I let the question hang. "I mean, he's your—" He caught himself. "You raised him." "Exactly," I said. Silence. "I wasn't there," he added, like a confession dressed as justification. "I know. That's why I was." He sighed. "Look, I can try to send something. But I don't have that kind of money. Not right now." "I understand," I said calmly. "But it's not my problem anymore." A pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You're not wrong. That was it. No apology. No gratitude. Just the quiet shock of a man being handed a bill for a meal he never intended to pay for." We hung up. No one wins in these conversations. There's no satisfaction. Just the math of consequence. I had stopped carrying what was never mine to bear, and now the people who stood at the center of that arrangement were feeling gravity for the first time. That afternoon, I drove past the house. Not to gloat, not to spy, just to see. The blinds were closed. Claire's car was still in the driveway, unmoved. I slowed, just enough to catch a shape in the window. Someone pacing back and forth like a prisoner waiting for a pardon that wouldn't come. I kept driving. There was nothing in that house I wanted anymore. Not the photos, not the bed, not the memories. They had hollowed it out long before I walked away. By the next morning, Claire sent another message. "You've made things very difficult for him. He's panicking. He can't access his funds. The semester starts next week." I stared at the words for a long time. He's panicking. Not, "We're sorry." Not, "We understand." Just, he's inconvenienced. And that's what it always was, wasn't it? I was never a man, never a father. I was a system, a quiet, invisible machine designed to shoulder every burden they wanted to pretend didn't exist. Money, labor, responsibility. When I worked double shifts so Evan could attend his prestigious private school, Claire called it a family decision. When I paid for his failed startup idea at 21, she called it belief. When I suggested he get a job to cover expenses, she called it cruelty. And now, when I had finally walked away, she called it making things difficult. I didn't respond. That night, she called again. This time I picked up. "Michael," she began, voice soft. "No," I said. She stopped. "This isn't a conversation," I continued. "I just wanted to say it to your face. We're close enough." "Say what?" "That I see it now. What I was. What you let him believe I was." She inhaled. "He was upset. It was a wedding. He was drinking. He didn't. He meant it." A beat. "You nodded, Claire." "I didn't. You did." She went quiet. "I wasn't angry then," I said. "I'm not even angry now. But I finally understand. You didn't choose me. You chose convenience. You chose silence. You let me carry your son because it was easier than asking his real father to step up. You praised me when it suited you, and abandoned me the moment it didn't. That's not fair." "It's true. Michael, he's young. He made a mistake. You don't have to destroy his life over it." I almost laughed. "Destroy," I repeated. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just removing myself. The rest is collapse. And that's on him." "You were his father for 17 years, she said. "You don't just walk away from that." I let the silence stretch. Then I said the one thing I knew would land. "He did." She tried again, softer this time. "What do you want, Michael? What will fix this?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "Nothing. That's the point. There is no fix. I'm not looking for reconciliation. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm drawing a boundary. One that should have been drawn years ago." She was crying now. I could hear it in the cracks of her voice, the hiccups between syllables. "We need you." "No," I said. "You need what I provide. But you never once asked what I needed." I ended the call, and this time I didn't feel guilt. I felt something like oxygen returning to a starved lung. The next day, the university emailed me directly. Not Evan. Not Claire. Me. A formal notice of overdue payments. Tuition suspended. Classes on hold. I forwarded it to Mark Dalton with no message attached. Let him feel what 16 years of avoidance finally costs. That evening, I sat on a park bench, watching the sunset behind a row of power lines. Birds moved between the wires like notes on a scale. Children played in the distance. I watched them, small, loud, innocent. None of them knew yet how families fracture, how love turns into obligation, how silence sharpens into abandonment. I thought about Evan then, not the man who poured wine on my head, but the boy who once called me Dad after I fixed his bike in the rain, who hugged me when I taught him to tie a tie, who asked me to sit in the front row at his high school graduation because his biological father had forgotten the date again. That boy is gone, replaced by a man who thought humiliation was a kind of power. But I remember that boy, and sometimes I miss him. But even that memory doesn't make me regret what I've done. Because what I gave freely. What I withdrew with purpose. And now, as the sun sinks and the wind rises, I sit in the calm of a life I finally own. Not a single person owns my time. Not a single obligation drags behind me. They'll learn to live without me, because I already have. They thought I wanted revenge. They thought I was waiting for an apology, for tears, for some display of guilt that could balance the scale. But this was never about revenge. This was never about making them hurt. It was about stopping the hurt. I didn't celebrate when the tuition office suspended Evan's enrollment. I didn't smile when Claire's voice cracked on the phone or when Mark's emails started arriving more frequently, each one a little more desperate than the last. I just didn't care, because that's what no one prepares you for, The emptiness that follows the decision to stop loving someone who refuses to love you back. Not hate, not joy, just absence. Like a limb you finally agree to amputate after years of dragging it behind you. Half dead. It was a line drawn in dust. One I should have drawn years ago. I watched them stumble, not because I wished for their collapse, but because I refused to hold them up anymore. The difference is razor thin. People mistake boundaries for cruelty when they've grown used to bleeding you dry. But I wasn't bleeding anymore. 3 days after that last call with Claire, I received a letter. Handwritten. Evan's scrawl, barely legible, angry, rushed. You left when we needed you. That says everything about who you really are. No greeting. No signature. Just that. I folded it in half. Tossed it into the trash. It was the last time he reached out. No apology. No reflection. Just accusation. A child's tantrum wrapped in adult sentences. But it said more than he meant it to. We needed you. Not we loved you. Not we were sorry. Not even we understand. Just need. That was always the bargain. They needed me, and so I was allowed to exist. But only within that role. Only within those terms. Provider. Chauffeur. Checkbook with a pulse. The moment I stopped being needed, I became disposable. And I realized then, I had never been a person to them. I had been infrastructure, like plumbing, like power lines. You only notice them when they stop working. So I stayed gone. I stopped checking their social media, blocked them eventually, not out of spite, but because I didn't want to be tempted by the version of themselves they perform for others. The smiling selfies, the filtered apologies, the captions about healing and growth that never mention what they destroyed to get there. Let them curate a narrative where I'm the villain. That's fine. I had been the silent background character in their story for so long. The shift to antagonist didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. The real pain was knowing how easily they could replace me in memory. At week 5, Claire emailed. Not a message. Not a call. An email, formal, sterile. Michael, I'm writing to ask you to reconsider your decision. Evan's situation is deteriorating. He's moved back in with me and refuses to speak. He blames himself but doesn't know how to fix it. He's applied for loans but they were denied. Mark isn't helping. He doesn't say it, but he's scared. I am too. Please. We're not asking for everything. Just enough to get him back on his feet. Even just this semester. Even just one more month. Claire. I stared at the screen for a long time. Read it again. And again. Looking for something that wasn't there. It never came. No ownership. No, I failed you. No, you didn't deserve this. Just a request. A quiet, almost professional plea for more. I didn't respond. I didn't rage. I didn't scream or cry. I closed the laptop and left the apartment. Because if I answered her, I knew what would happen. I tell myself it was temporary. That I was helping, not returning. That this one exception wouldn't become a new expectation. And I'd fall again. Into the old roles. Into the cage I had just broken out of. So I didn't answer. And she didn't write again. That was the last time she reached out in her own name. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of habit. Is this Michael? The voice asked. Young. Nervous. Yes. This is Alicia. I'm a friend of Evan's. From campus. I said nothing. I know this is weird. He didn't want me to call. But I thought maybe if someone else said it. I cut her off. Does he know you're calling? No, she admitted. Then don't do it again. I ended the call. It wasn't cruelty. It was preservation. Because that's what happens when people start drowning, they reach for anything. Even the ones they pushed off the boat. And if you're not careful, they'll pull you under just to keep themselves above water. That night I drove to the lake. It was cold, and the air carried the kind of silence that makes you hear yourself more clearly. I stood by the edge and let the wind cut through me. And I thought about the man I used to be. The man who came home every night exhausted but hopeful. The man who convinced himself that being unthanked was noble. The man who paid for birthday parties where he sat in the corner like an afterthought. The man who taught Evan to shave, to drive, to lie. I hated him, Not because he was weak, but because he thought sacrifice would earn him love. It doesn't. It earns expectation. And the moment you stop delivering, you become the enemy. A few weeks later, I heard Evan dropped out. Too many missed classes. Too many unpaid bills. Too little motivation. Claire posted something vague online about closed doors and new beginnings. Friends commented with hearts, prayers, empty platitudes about resilience. No mention of me. No mention of the man who paid for the first 17 years of that journey. And that's fine. I didn't need them to remember me. I needed me to remember me. I spent years erasing myself in service of a family that never drew me into the picture. A ghost with a wallet. A man who stood at the edge of photographs so he could be cropped out later without consequence. Not anymore. I deleted the shared documents. Removed access to every account. Cleared the last folders with names like Evan_tuition_2022 and Claire_medical_bills. Erased them, not from memory, but from obligation. And when I was done, I stood in my apartment, alone, whole, not happy, but free, because this wasn't revenge. This wasn't about punishment. It was a boundary. And boundaries, real ones, don't come with exceptions. They come with consequences. You cross them, and you learn what life feels like when the person you counted on is no longer on call. And now, finally, they're learning.